Welcome to Find, Tell, Share, the Storytellers podcast. I'm Chris Sissons, and my business is Market Together. I'm a local marketing coach who specialises in using stories for business development and marketing. Now, this is our 13th podcast, which means that we're 1 year old. Happy birthday, Jemma. Jemma is our resident musician. So.
That was my attempt at the kazoo, and let's.
Oh.
Right, there we go.
I think that's enough of that.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so I can't believe we've been doing this for 1 year. If you haven't yet checked out the other episodes, the other 12 episodes, go back and listen to them after this one. I'm Jemma Rosenthal, and my business is Creative Hearts. I'm a creative life coach, and I help people to find their voices and live their most creative lives. And I do lots of different creative things like singing, songwriting, and acting, dancing, and writing, and stuff like that. So on this show, we talk about everything storytelling. And this time, later on in this, before we introduce our guest, we'll just give you a bit of what's coming up in the rest of the podcast. And I'm going to be talking about a book that's been written in German, and now just the English version has come out about my family history and how they escaped from the war in Germany. And so that'll be later on. And also Chris is going to raise a question about the handholds of truth in storytelling. But before all that, Chris is going to tell us about our guest.
Yes, this time I'm delighted to introduce our guest, John Chapman, who after 20 years of researching the family histories of his own and his friends, was persuaded to become a professional genealogist. Over the past 6 years, he's undertaken over 30 full research projects. As well as helping people find their families through DNA research, he also talks and runs workshops on family and local history. He's currently writing a book based around real people involved in the nail-making trade in the 17th century, exporting from South Yorkshire to the American colonies. So, welcome, John.
Welcome.
Good morning. Hi.
Very pleased to have you on the podcast today.
That's great. No problem.
Yes. So, John, many of our listeners may be unfamiliar with the work of a genealogist. Would you like to just start by giving us some idea of what you actually do? You know, blowing dust off fusty documents, I should imagine is.
Well, to a certain extent, it's being nosy, really. It's looking at people's families, for good or bad, and researching back. People want to know lots of different things. Some people just want to know where they came from, how far back their family goes. They may want to know about certain individuals who they've been told about, but they don't really know about. So it can be quite a number of things. And also, obviously, you mentioned the DNA, finding long-lost cousins who may know a little bit more about their families.
Yeah. And how far back can you go? I mean, does it become less and less meaningful as you go back? Or?
I had a discussion with somebody last week about this. How personal can it be? And one of the things we decided, if it's in writing, if you just tell something, you know that's it. But if you actually see it in writing, sometimes it seems to mean a lot more to people. Generally, you can get back in the census to about 1841. Church records about to the 1530s. Prior to that, you've either got to have been somebody or been in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Where there's actual written records. If you're related to the nobility, their records can go back to Battle of Hastings, Norman Conquest, and even further back sometimes.
So is 1530 something to do with the Reformation and the closing of the monasteries?
Not really. It's when they decided then that births, deaths, and burials had to be recorded. Yeah. So it was that's when it had to be. That was in law then. You had to record the birth deaths in your parish. So from then on, the records were there. Yeah.
So and I mean, does it mean a lot if you can go back that far to the 16th century?
Yeah, it's unusual that you can get all the way back, and it can take quite a long time to actually put it all together. I'm doing one research at the moment, and it's in Braithwell in South Yorkshire, and luckily all their church records from 1560 are online, but it's working your way back through all the church registers, linking the families together. So what I do, I write them all down, all the surnames, birth, deaths, burials, and then try and figure out who's who. Yeah. Is it a brother or is it the father? And just work your way back with the family group. Yeah. So it's can take a while, but it can be done.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm sort of interested in my great grandparents because I've heard stories about them. But beyond that, I mean, it'd be interesting, but it becomes they're probably all over the place. I think I got an ancestor who's Irish, and quite a few came. I think the Sissons came from Harrogate originally, so that was another place.
Right.
And I've got my grandfather. One of my grandfathers was from Boston in Norfolk. So it becomes less interesting, I think, as you go back, unless there's some particular thread that you're following, I suppose.
I followed one family back, and they go back to Edward III. Yeah, and the person I did it for, they've got grandkids, and their grandkids' history to them now means so much because they have a figure in the past who they are actually related to. So even though they're 8 and 9 years old, their interest in the fact that this was great whatever granddad, has really sparked their interest in learning history. So because it means something a bit more personal.
Yeah.
Well, carry on.
Yeah, go on.
That's all right.
I was going to say it's definitely since reading a book on my family, it's kind of like it definitely sparks your interest in history a lot more, and also the social economic as well surrounding at the time, because obviously at different time periods they have there's so much going on, so it's not always just about the history of your family, but also the history of in general, because it's what was going on at the time. And I'm guessing, how much of that do you include in your kind of your research in terms of like researching what happens to different families in terms of what was going on at the time as well?
Yeah, every family's got a story. No, you're right. One particular one I did, the guy said, "Can you do my family history?" He said, "Oh, they're very Sheffield." And I got back to his great-grandfather, and he wasn't. He was from Nottingham.
Yeah.
But his father, he was born in Chesterfield, brought up in Nottingham, but his father was born, and his mother were born in Coventry. So what's the story behind that? Basically what it was, he worked in the pits down in Coventry, and she was a ribbon maker. And when it all got mechanised in the 1840s, 50s, it just disappeared. So they ended up in the workhouse. Then a pit opened up near Chesterfield, so they moved to Chesterfield. But there's all that backstory of why did they do certain things? Why did they move certain places? So it brings all that together. And you'll see certain terms. You'll see certain terms which are initialised because at the time they made sense to everybody. And you're thinking, what's that mean? And what was one? It was frame KM, FKM, FKM on all these things. I thought, what's that? And it's frame knit maker. Yeah, and they knitted on frames. Yeah, and there was a whole cottage industry of doing that. Yeah, and that obviously disappeared completely. Yeah, so but it's just building that picture up and finding out what they did. Yeah, and it's like Chris said at the beginning, I'm doing this book at the moment, and it's on. Yeah, it sounds boring. Yeah, the nail, but you've got to think about all the people involved in that. Right from the start, working your way through. Yeah.
So when's it going to be published? We're all.
Good question.
Yeah.
I've been researching it for about a year, and I started writing it about a month ago. But as I'm writing it, you'll find, I need to check this out again. I need to check that. I need to double check. So it's everybody's got a story. And like I think it was Margaret Atwood said, in the end, we all become stories.
We do. Yeah.
And basically, I'm starting with the ironworks. Right. So one of the first things I did was look at where the iron came from, which was Tankersley area, and looked at a family of iron workers who were actually iron workers. So built the story around their family and getting the iron from there to the Wortley Forge, the forge workers, and also the people in charge of the whole lot who owned the land and the whole procedure, really, which was the Wortley family and the Fitzwilliams at Wentworth, and how it got transported to Thorpe Hesley, which is just outside Sheffield, and made into nails, and from there transported to Bawtry, and from Bawtry onto ships and eventually to America. During the early period in America, there was a big shortage of nails, and if they built a new house, they actually used to burn the old house down to get the nails. Yeah, they were that short of nails. So it's the whole story all the way through, and although it's based on real people and real incidents and how it happened, yeah, you've obviously got to make that into a story. So they class it as and what they call narrative non-fiction. Yeah, so you put the narrative in, but it's a non-fiction story. Yeah.
Well, it sounds fascinating. But you've got a story for us today, John. I hope.
Right. Yeah. There's various things that I come across when I'm researching. One, which I've mentioned before, is my great uncle. His father was he came across in the Irish famine from Mayo, and his wife did. They married in England, but they both came from Mayo, and they're both Gaelic speakers, so English wasn't their first language. And my great grandfather and my grandmother. So my grandmother and my great uncle were brought up in South Yorkshire, but they were very much Irish. And as a lot with immigrants, they got picked on. And my father used to mention things about my great uncle, stories, lots of stories. And I started looking through the newspaper archives, and up he popped. And I found 19 court cases for him where he'd been in trouble. The first one was for throwing stones with his brother. Yeah, where the constable in the village had got them. Yeah, took them to court. Next one was for riding a bike without lights. The next one was for fighting. He was a big guy. He was 6'5", and he had a 50-inch chest, and he used to prize fight, and he used to drink. And you can see what can happen there. He used to get in trouble for fighting and drinking. He various stories. He got into trouble, and the police came to pick him up. They've sent 3 policemen, 2 either side, 1 behind him. They were going across a bridge over a canal. He bent down to tie his bootlace. He picked 2 up round the ankles and threw them into the canal. The other policeman ran away, and he ran off. They eventually caught him, obviously. But that was a story my father told me, and I thought, yeah, all right then. But it's true. It's in the newspaper cuttings. So you never know when you start researching back what you're going to find. Is it true? Is it not? How much is true? And from there, you can build a story up of his life. He was in the First World War. He won the military medal. He used to sink mine shafts after the war. He was a mine sinker. And he ended up as a tramp, just going up and down the country. Yeah. And he disappeared out of the family's life in the mid-60s. This is up in Barnsley. He was actually in a home in Sheffield, and he didn't want to be a burden on the family, so he never contacted the family. So, interesting life story. He obviously had PTSD and other problems, but he was very much his own man. And you think he'd be a bit rough and ready, but he was well read, and he never swore. He was very well spoken. So 2 sides of a person, yeah. And it's finding this out about people in the past. What were they actually like? Can you actually make sense of their lives? Why they did things? Why they were the way they were? In effect, yeah. So you never know what you're actually going to find.
Yes, that's there's certainly a fascination there. Did you ever meet this uncle yourself?
I did. I remember walking down to the shops with my mother, and he was walking up the road. And my mother was from Dublin. She was a city girl, as it happened, and she was quite scared of him. And she held me behind her. I don't know how old I was. I was 3, 4. I don't know. Can't remember. But he stopped and went, "Is that young John?" And he gave me a crown piece. Yeah. And he had a patch on his eye, an eye patch. Yeah. Big guy with a stick. And he carried on. He was going to see his sister, my great aunt Ellen. And I got home, mentioned the eye patch to my dad. And he went, "Oh, yeah, he lost that during the war." I went, "Oh, the First World War." He said, "No, he lost that in the Second World War." I'm like, "Wow, he fought in both wars. That's amazing." He said, "No, it was fighting with Americans in Barnsley outside a pub." But yeah, he was quite a character and well known throughout the area. Yeah, if you mentioned his name, yeah, people knew who he was, sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that piecing together of the little bits of scraps of stories that's and I suppose the fact that he was in court so often has made the trail easier to follow.
Yes, it did. Yeah, once I found one, obviously, finding the other bits and pieces.
Yeah, the well-behaved people leave less of a footprint.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When you do family research, you'll find some people, all you find is their birth, their marriage, and their death, and that will be it, and possibly what they did for a living, while others leave quite a rich trail. Yeah, so it's finding the people with the rich trails that make the story. Yeah.
Yes. Have you got any other stories from different people that you've researched that might be of interest?
Yeah, there's you'll get there's one I researched, and it was a Irish family. Came from Wicklow, and I researched back. Nothing spectacular at all until I got back, which is unusual for the Irish records. I got back to the 1780s and 90s with this particular family, and this one guy, he fought the English in 1798 at the Battle of Vinegar Hill, which was, you've probably never heard of it, but it was actually a really big battle. Thousands involved. The Irish lost. He got captured, and he was one of the henchmen of one of the main guys, sort of thing. So, and they shipped him off to Australia. He became friends with the captain on the ship, and he's basically a political prisoner, so he wasn't a criminal as such. They got to Botany Bay, and he was promised when he got there he'd be given 4 acres of land and a cow, and basically make a life for himself, but they just didn't want him in England and Ireland. He was out of the way. When he got there, the governor at the time was Captain Bligh from Bligh and the Bounty, who, from all what I gather and research, he wasn't a very nice guy, and he decided this is not happening, and they slung him in prison. Yeah, and he was in prison for about 6 years. Another governor came, went, "No, this is an injustice," gave him even more land than he was initially entitled for, and more cows. He built up a herd, and in the end, he was supplying Sydney with milk, with dairy, and made quite a little empire for himself. And where the cattle sheds were and all that sort of thing is basically where Sydney Bridge goes over the river. Yeah, I haven't inquired any further on that side of the family, but there's obviously descendants of his out there around the area. But yeah, it's just a little interesting little story how he got out there as a prisoner, and how he actually made a really good life for himself.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on either of the stories?
Yeah. I think it would be. I think actually, Gemma, it may be a good idea
I can
to
do.
hear your contribution
Yeah.
now, and then we can sort
that's
of
a
look
good
at
idea.
everything
I was just
together.
going to ask though, just before moving on to mine, John, what does, going back to your uncle's story, what does it mean? Because I know Chris asked me this, so I thought I'd ask you. What does it mean to you in terms of your life story, knowing about your uncle? How does it change how you are now? Before you didn't know this story, and now you do know the story. What's the difference?
I think, obviously, I was, if you want to put it like that, I was like third, fourth generation, down from there. So I was very much Yorkshire, and to look back and think about not particularly my father, but some of my aunts and my great aunts, they were quite anti-English, and you can see. I didn't quite understand it before. But you can see now they got picked on a fair bit, like a lot of immigrant families do, and you can see where their attitude actually came from, and how that got passed down. I've even got cousins now who are very much in that sort of thought process, and they've inherited that. That's been passed down.
The actually kind of moving from that in terms of immigrants. So the story that I'm going to talk about is about my family immigrating to England from Germany in the Second World War because they were Jewish. And the book has actually been put together about my great auntie, who I did know when I was younger. And we used to go around to her flat in London, and she had all these artwork on the walls. It was absolutely covered in artwork. And you'd go up and then she'd have loads and loads of sweets on the table, like cakes and things. And I just used to think, oh, yes, we get lots of food at Auntie Liesel's. And and that was all, I mean, as a child, that's all you know about, I didn't know anything about her story or her life or anything like that. And the same with my granddad. I only knew him a few years of my life, and he never talked about Germany, although he did have a slight German accent as far as I can remember. But yeah, so the book is based on my great auntie, but it does talk about my granddad as well. So it's actually not that far back in history, because it's my mum's dad is featured in the book as well as Auntie Liesel. Now the book focuses on Liesel because her daughter is Baroness Julia Neuberger, who's my mum's cousin, and who you might have heard on radio for TV programs and things like that. And she was giving a speech, and she told a story about Liesel. When she died, she started talking Swabian, and she'd forgotten all her English, and she said, I want to go home. And then Julia said, well, you are home, Mummy, and then she said, no, my real home in Heilbronn. And that was her last words, as far as I'm aware in the story. And so in real life, in the story kind of thing. And so she told this story of in a speech, and Joachim Schler, who's wrote the book, who's an academic at Southampton University, he came from Heilbronn. So he was really interested in stories of immigrants and the history of it. So he went to Julia and asked her, have you got any more information about, the story of your mum? And she said, well, I've got these letters. And it turned out that they had a stack full of letters from the wartime where so she had moved to England quite early on, and she was starting off her new life. And then her parents and my granddad were still in Heilbronn, and so they were exchanging letters, and they would always try to get her to help them to get out the country, basically. But they were talking about going to different, there was so many letters as well, not just from them, but from other immigrants in different places. So they were going to America, they were going to Palestine, they were going to different, they wanted to go to Uruguay or something. But it's really kind of fascinating how much information you gain just from the letters. And there's so much, the kind of general tone is quite, anxious and fearful, and how are we going to, move, and talking about the furniture and things like that. So it's quite interesting to read, and obviously quite heartbreaking as well, because a lot of my family didn't make it out. So there are ancestors that Liesel talks about who, one jumped off a train on the way to a concentration camp, another died in concentration camps. So these are like, I don't know, my great, or no, be like, I don't know, anyways, cousins and and uncles and things like that. But the main storyline in the book from the letters is that Liesel wanted to be an artist. She wanted to work in art, and she wanted to work in bookselling. And her parents had other ideas for it. They wanted her to get married, and she did end up getting married. But it's not till later on in the book that she gets married. And she did end up working in art as an art correspondent for AJR. So it's a fascinating story, and I think she's really, it's really inspiring to know about my great auntie and to know what she went through, and the fact she managed to bring over her parents and my granddad, obviously, because I'm here. But so. yeah, that's a bit of the story. And we did my family went on a Zoom. So Julia and the author did a Zoom the other day, and somebody who worked with Liesl, who was actually called Alice when she came here as well. But we knew her as Liesl. So they did a whole Zoom on it the other day, because I think the book's now being published in English. But it's quite expensive to go to get the book. But we can still put links if anyone's wants to buy the book, or put the links in. But in German, it's I think a regular price. But yeah, that's the story, and we're just all finding out about this now because we couldn't. I've only just started reading the book now because it was all in German before, so I couldn't. Just had the pictures.
Yeah, it's interesting how even little snippets will build up a story. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you'll get a little snippet here, another little snippet there. And as you put them all together, you start to build a picture up of the person or the family or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's just amazing how just letters can create a story. And obviously it's partly, the author does talk about, he is writing a story as he's going along. And I guess that's what you're doing as part of your book. And how easy is it to do that as a writer? How do you do that?
I'm finding it the story it's fairly straightforward. It's just making sure that the factual stuff fits in okay. I found a thing in an archive in London University last week which I found about Wortley Village, and it was an incident involving the warrener of Lord Wortley, who was assaulted in Barnsley while he was picking meat up, and it was in the court. Yeah, but it's the whole text of exactly what's said in the court in the 1700s, word for word. So it's as it was said, and it's just reading that. I think somebody said that in Barnsley, on that particular day at that time, and that's what was said. And it's just fascinating to sort of weave those sort of things in, to know that sentence was actually used. Yeah, it's quite rude, so I'm not saying that here.
Yeah, and like you said before, when something's written down, it becomes... I can't remember what you thought about when it's written down. Can you just... Yeah, it becomes more real to people. Yeah. People get more of an attachment to it, I think. Yeah. And if you go to... this sentence was written by this particular guy who was a yeoman, and he was basically having a go at Lord Wortley and all his workers. Basically, he didn't like them. But if you found his ancestors and said to him, your, 8 times great grandfather actually said this. Yeah, this is what he said. Yeah, that must be quite amazing having that. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, information.
I've actually found out because I went for a walk with my mum and dad yesterday for Father's Day, and there was a horse and cart were going past, and my dad told me a story that his dad's mum was her parents were killed by horse and cart, and then he became a Catholic, she became a Catholic because she was brought up by nuns. So that's why my auntie is Catholic. So it's really it's just like it wasn't. But it's so funny because we just don't even think about even horse and cart. It's just even that long ago when that was the trend.
I said to somebody last week, actually, I've just started doing their family history, and their father is 96, I think. I said, what does he know? He says, I'm not. I says, interview him. He says, what do you mean? I says, sit down, tape it, interview him, just say, what was it like when you were a child? Where did you live? What did you do? Yeah, and just let him talk. Just let him talk. Yeah. And you'll find out stuff you didn't even know about him.
This whole, one incident like that can change your whole who you are, because then suddenly he becomes a person with the amputated leg, or suddenly someone gets raised by nuns and becomes Catholic. It's these seeming these incidents or things that happen, with the story about them coming across from Germany. It's like suddenly they're now living in England, and now our family is now English, and it's kind of like
Right.
kind of also full circle because we can now get a German
Right.
passport. So it's my cousin's got one. I haven't applied yet, but it's interesting that we're not separate from the events that happened, because everything creates the direction of which our lives go in.
Yeah. 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 And it's just getting all these snippets. Yeah, I mean, the guy I was on about before, my great uncle, his eldest brother, as a child, was run over by a horse and cart and had his leg amputated as a child. Yeah. And my great grandfather, the story is he carried him 8 miles to the hospital. Yeah. And yeah, it's just a story. Yeah, that's all I know. Yeah, that's all I know.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's interesting that if you go back a few hundred years, the culture was primarily oral. So the storytelling would have been mostly, getting people together, and then someone would tell a story, and that would be how stories were passed on. And the written versions were not a priority because, it took time to, even when they had the printing press, it must have been quite a lot of effort in getting something printed. So mostly people would be sharing stories verbally. And this is one of the big changes that has happened over the last few hundred years as we've become more and more of a written culture.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think if you live, most of my family going back to the 1700s were lived in South Yorkshire. Yeah. And so being in that environment as well, and actually going around places where you knew they worked and lived, and some of the houses are still there, and it's just that, just knowing what is actually around the area where you live sometimes, especially if your family's been there for a long time. Yeah. They walked up this lane, they rode a horse up this lane, they did whatever, they went to that pub or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, you get little sort of images and snippets. I mean, when my grandfather died, my grandmother mentioned that he was a buyer for a little chain of greengrocers, and he went to the fruit and veg market, which is round about where Pond's Forge is now, and load up he had a horse and cart. Carry on with that theme, and then he would take the veg and fruit to the shops. There's one at Hunter's Bar, Broomhill, Crooks. It was Wilson's, the greengrocers. And my grandmother said in the winter when it was really cold, there would be icicles hanging off the reins. When he was driving the horses, which is a wonderful image. It just gives you an idea of what it was like. But I suppose what we don't get so much is the inner life, and that's really one of the. I was listening to Hilary Mantel on Radio 4, who's just been awarded. I forget the prize, but it's for historic fiction. For the third volume in her trilogy about the life of Thomas Cromwell. And the last volume is called The Mirror and the Light. And she said that's her favourite. It's not because she became a better writer, it's because she was going deeper into the inner life of Thomas Cromwell. And she said it was challenging to write, but she had the handholds of truth. So she had to make sure that what she wrote was in accordance with the research, but beyond that she could use her imagination. And I think this is one of the challenges for storytelling. I don't know whether we can illustrate it this way. Jemma, can you tell us what you know about Robin Hood?
Well, obviously, the story is that he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. But I think I have been to somewhere where Robin Hood has been to. I really don't. To be honest, it's not something I know a lot about. But I have learnt about stuff. But yes, what's your point, Chris? Go.
Well, where did he live? Where did he do his taking from the rich and
I've
giving
forgotten.
to the poor?
I know that I know where it is, but I've forgotten.
Robin Hood was a great hero on the black and white television. Robin Hood, with his band of men. Robin Hood, riding through the glen. What was it? Loved by the good. No, I can't remember how it all went then. But and there was Friar Tuck, Little John. He's buried in Hathersage. So he must be real. And Little John was huge, so his grave
That's it. That's the one Hathersage that I'm remembering.
And Maid Marian, of course. And so John, what do you know about Robin Hood?
Right, interesting. You should mention. I researched a family about 2 years ago, and I'm doing one at the moment, and they both go back to the Locksley family and to Robert of Locksley, who was allegedly Robin of Locksley, Robin Hood. Yeah. So so that's two families totally separate, whose ancestors is possibly Robin Hood.
And Locksley, for the benefit of those who don't know, is nowhere near Nottingham. It's actually very close to Sheffield. It's a little village just outside. If you go through Hillsborough, across Malin Bridge and out that way, you get to Locksley. So Robin Hood was actually a Sheffielder.
Yeah, he was.
Now, we enjoyed. Did you watch Robin Hood, John? When you?
I did.
Yeah. So we enjoyed that, and there's been various other films, and I think there's been a recent version of Robin Hood on as well, a more recent one. But
my sister played Maid Marian as well, as far as I can remember, in a show.
So this is a character who's accrued a whole load of myth. Yeah. But the biggest falsehood is that he was in Nottingham. Presumably the sheriff of Nottingham's territory stretched as far as Locksley, did it? Would that be?
It did, actually. And I've been looking at some records recently. And there's a possibility that Robin of Locksley was actually related to a sheriff of Nottingham as well. So, yeah.
That's so we. But I think I'm trying to remember what I'm driving at. But it's just showing how there's often truth buried in these stories, but they've been embroidered several times, over the years.
Can I say, it's because something that's been bothering me before coming onto this podcast is, and I don't know if you ever feel this, either of you do, but I always think about what if I'm getting my facts wrong, and it's just that, and like you were saying about handholds of truth, it's like sometimes the way my memory works, so sometimes it will create loads of stories around things, but then sometimes I'm thinking, hang on, did that happen, or have I just made that up, or is this, getting dates of this wrong or this wrong? Sometimes it freezes me because I think, well, I can't tell the story because in case I get the facts wrong. So have either of you experienced that fear? I have that because even just now thinking, did that happen?
It's a normal thing, Jemma. Doing genealogy, you've got to remember people do misremember. They just do. There was a woman I was chatting to last week, and she was saying she remembered taking the dog for a walk with her sister, and the dog running off and dragging her across the gravel. And she said this to her sister. She said, "No, that was me." And they are both convinced it was them.
Oh my!
And they don't know. They don't actually know.
Yeah.
And everybody does it to a certain extent. Yeah. You misremember facts. Yeah. So who's to say? who's to say? As a genealogist, purely on the genealogy side, I've got to look at what's written down. And hopefully that is the facts. But the more you do it, you find out, no, people told lies. They made things up. So you've just got to do as much as you can.
Yeah.
You find sort of contradictions. There's misremembering. That's one of the issues that we have as storytellers. But the other thing is more structural in putting a story together. I mean, if you're telling a story that, say, happened over 10 years, and you've got 10 minutes or a couple of sides of A4 to tell it, you're going to cut a heck of a lot out of that story, and you've got to, but somehow you've still got to make it have an impact, because you're writing. Because the whole point of telling stories is to, or one of the points of telling stories is to entertain the audience, to get and hold their attention. So how you actually structure a story. I mean, you could begin a story in the present and say, this is how I am now. I'm now going to go flashback to the past and show how I got to where I am. Or you can begin the story in the past and bring it forward to where you are now. All of that, or jumping around in time. I've worked with people on stories that begin in the present, go into the past, go into the deeper past, come back to the not so deep past, and then back to the present. So you've got that sort of ABCBA structure to the story. So you're actually playing around with the facts. And it's not necessarily misleading. A well-structured story clearly shouldn't be misleading. But we are still pushed, I think, to make the story coherent, and particularly when you're telling a story about ancestors or people who lived in the past, we don't have access to all that. We never will have all the access to all the facts, because they're just not there. I mean, I tell a story about William Shaw, who was one of the founders of the Brightside and Carbrook Cooperative in Sheffield. And we know that they had a meeting in the Methodist Church Hall on Brightside Lane. We know that was as a result of him seeing a cooperative clock in a little village outside of Rotherham that neither John or I can remember the name of at the moment. And we know that the original contract / constitution for the cooperative was signed on the anvil by all the 12 people who met in the church hall. And that's all I know, pretty much. So how do you turn that into a coherent story? Is something of a challenge. And I've put stuff in that I've later discovered was wrong. I had him doing the wrong job. I decided he was a crucible steel pourer, but they didn't do that at Jessop's. I'm not quite sure what they did, but it wasn't that. But trying to just create that sense of, what was it like in the 1840s for people who were in employment but not wealthy. It was. What did they discuss? Well, they must have talked about issues, because one of the big issues that underlied the cooperative movement was adulteration of food. So presumably they discussed that. How do we get flour that's actually flour and not got chalk dust? And they used to put arsenic in it to keep it white. Which is not recommended as an ingredient. So there's all what was the context? Why did they set up the cooperative? And you've just got to put some imagination into that. But this is the great challenge of storytelling. Because even if you're a real life storyteller, you're still using imagination and an element of fiction.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said about the past, Chris. They were saying one of the things doing history and whatever is the past is what you don't know. History is what you do know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the past, to a certain extent, you have to be quite liberal with
and I suppose the
making it up
past
to a certain
or history becomes now when you're telling a story, because you're reading it and you're going into the world of that story. So you're almost, if it's a well-written story, you're living, but you're not living in the past. You're living through you're living in the present, but through the story of history. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like I mentioned with the nail makers. One of my ancestors was a foundling in Herefordshire. Got sent to the Foundling Hospital in London, then got sent to Yorkshire to be an apprentice to a nail maker, and became a nail maker. And it was a 7-year apprenticeship. But when you read things, it said nail making was simple, and you're thinking, well, why was there a 7-year apprenticeship? But then you read all about all the different types of nails that had to be made. And also, you weren't classed as a decent nailer until you could do 6 nails from one heating of a metal bar. Yeah. So it was the speed of how quick you could actually produce these nails and get these nails out. And that just builds a picture up of thinking about me now giving a hot bit of metal and saying, right, make a nail out of that.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, it'd probably take me half a day. Yeah. If that, I might not be able to do it. So to churn 6 or 7 nails out from one heating of a metal bar, you can see where it's, why it was a long apprenticeship.
Yeah. And apprenticeships, I think, certainly in the past, were much more about observing how it was done and observing it, and then gradually beginning to do bits and pieces of it, whatever it was. Whereas these days it seems to be you go on an apprenticeship is you go on a course for a couple of days and do a job alongside of it, sort of thing. It doesn't seem to be quite that. And to actually graduate from being an apprentice, what was the next step up from an apprentice? So a journeyman or something. But that was quite an event. It was a rite of passage, I think, wasn't it? I can't remember what they called it. There was one in the musical, The Stirrings in Sheffield. I think they called it something like a losing, or which I think he got thrown in the water or something. It was that sort of rather rough and tumble sort of celebration when somebody graduated. And
you see it in the records as well. There'll be nail makers, and then there'll be a horse nail maker, and then there'll be a master nail maker. Yeah, as they develop their career as such.
Yeah. So our challenge then, I think, as storytellers, is how we do hang on to the handholds of truth, and even in fiction, there will be some handholds of truth. You might find it easy to believe in dragons, but there may be other things that are much harder to believe because they go against the way we know people behave. But as storytellers, part of our job is to take the facts and find a way of conveying them as stories, whether that's an oral story or a written story. So, John, if people want to find out more about your work or get in touch with you, how do they go about it?
There's my email, which is John at...
This will all be in the show notes, so they can...
So John at pastlivesresearch.co.uk, or through LinkedIn, they can find me, which is pretty easy to find. Also, either on Twitter or Facebook, and it's Past Lives Ancestry. on either of those. Yeah, not very active, but they're there.
That's good. Yeah, and Jemma, how about you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram, YouTube and LinkedIn and Twitter, pretty much all of them. At the moment I use Instagram and Facebook more, but I'm on as Jemma Rosenthal, but also Creative Hearts as well. So either of those pages. And you can also join, I have a group called Awakening Voices, which people can share their stories on that page, or their poems or songs. And you can have one-on-one coaching sessions with me as well, creative life coaching or find your voice coaching. And you can also join the Find Your Voice monthly workshops on the 4th Friday of the month. And Chris, how do they find you?
That's great. I didn't know you were doing some of that. So
yes. So
yes.
Here you go. There's the information.
Yeah. Well, I too coach in marketing and the use of stories in all aspects of marketing. It's possibly more to it than you might think. If you want to try me out, there's Telling Stories Making Business. We normally meet on 2nd and 4th Thursdays. I'm now building up the autumn from September onwards program for that. So if anybody out there would like to tell their story and get feedback, that would be great. We've got a couple more coming up over the next few weeks before the summer break. I also... like Jemma, I do the coaching I think I mentioned that already. I'm going mad. And I'm also planning to start a new initiative called That's Your Problem. And the idea there is someone will share an intractable problem that they have. Mostly I'm thinking in terms of people like city councillors, council officers, leaders of voluntary sector organisations, community groups and so on, who've got an intractable problem and really want to spend some time not solving it, but getting clear what the problem actually is, so that by the end of the meeting we can say, that's your problem.
That's good.
But it's crucial for business people as well as for whoever the problem owner is, because solving problems is what businesses do, and learning how to identify the problem is the first step in sales, in fact. So it's really important. There'll be more about that in the future. It's not quite ready yet. Still trying to work out how to do it in practice. But there we are. So that's it today. So a big thank you to John. And it's farewell from me and also from...
Thank you. Yeah, Jemma.
Okay. Jemma.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.